Is there anything else I should know about Nirvana? They hail from Seattle, WA, or the surrounding area, and they play underground alternative grunge rock. For as long as there is modern rock, Kurt Cobain's name will be synonymous with a watershed moment. As an artist and singer, Cobain was more. He was Nirvana's lead singer and the driving force behind the grunge movement of the 90s. An era that had long since passed was echoed by his words. Millions of young people were able to relate to Kurt's Nevermind and Smells Like Teen Spirit and those other raw, haunting songs as they struggled to find their place in an increasingly homogenous world. Is his notoriety a blessing or a crutch for unresolved trauma? Despite being an independent band, Nirvana became a global phenomenon, with the sales of Nevermind reaching over 30 million copies. Despite his fame, he struggled with mental health issues, including depression and substance misuse, as well as a strained relationship with Courtney Love. In his life, she brought both love and chaos. Music was his confession, but the music industry turned everything into a commodity. He achieved artistic heights but also fell emotionally. His life was a tragic song full of paradoxes. He became the voice of a decade, despite coming from a small town in Aberdeen, which is the worst possible way to put it. It's better to burn out than to fade away. What was actually happening behind the scenes of those legendary hits? Come on, we need to know the plot of this show. Background: Aberdeen, Washington is the site of Kurt Donald Cobain's birth on February 20, 1967. The small hazy town of Aberdeen was primarily a logging town, and the air was thick with staunch conservative ideology. The humble wooden home where the Cobain family resided betrayed their working-class origins. His mother, Wendy, was a waitress. His father, Don, was a mechanic who believed that boys should act like any other child, tough, well-behaved, and unassuming. However, Kurt differed from his peers. He possessed a vivid imagination and stunning blue eyes. Kurt sat and sketched pictures as the other boys went to the park to get baseball bats. While others listened to country music, he spent a lot of time listening to Arlo Guthrie and the Beatles. He was able to use household objects as drums, sing, and even create drawings. While many in town acknowledged Kurt's innate talent, only a select few had the perceptiveness to truly appreciate it. When Kurt's parents divorced, he was 9 years old. He had reached a turning point from which he would never recover. After passing through his parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles, he ended up with friends. One and only lodging option was available. Anywhere I went, I didn't feel at home. Kurt once explained his feelings of rejection by saying, "I felt abandoned. I thought my parents didn't want me." This insight into his parents' disapproval permeated his music and his life choices. Instead of raising his voice in defiance, he retreated into his art, leaving no one to hear him. However, he did not spend much of his life alone. He was the object of numerous unsuccessful attempts to mold him. The fact that Kurt's parents were no longer married didn't stop his father from encouraging him to become a man. He insisted he join the guys, shoot hoops, wrestle, and play sports. However, Kurt had zero interest in acting. He aspired to be authentic. The price he paid was being teased, bullied, and labeled a freak at school. His physicians prescribed the ADHD stimulant Ritalin to calm his agitation. However, he had to take tranquilizers because the medicine kept him awake at night. Excessive use of adrenaline and sleep aids began in Kurt's body prior to his 10th birthday. Without hesitation, he chose this chemical spiral. He retreated even further into his own psyche. The constant struggle between remaining silent and finally giving up felt like a war. His uncle gave him his first guitar for his 14th birthday. After that, his singing became his sole means of coping with his difficult upbringing. At school, Kurt was exceptional in every respect. Not only was he head over heels for love, but he also sported striped shirts and dyed his hair a rainbow of colors. He was completely unpopular among the lads. Kurt didn't deny being gay, but everyone else at school did. True story, he once declared, "I'm not gay, but sometimes I wish I were just to annoy the homophobes." He despised conformity, playing by the book, and Aberdeen, which he characterized as full of bigots, rednecks, and idiots. The isolation he felt there was something he never fully recovered from. Kurt ultimately decided not to finish high school. His mother expelled him. He occasionally slept without a roof at friends' houses, on benches, or in abandoned vehicles. However, his guitar accompanied him wherever he went, like an uncritical friend. Kurt Cobain didn't always intend to play music. There had been no other opportunity to escape. In his early 20s, when he was homeless, unemployed, and uneducated, Kurt began to seriously consider forming a band. Being famous wasn't the goal. Life or death was at stake. He was either going to die or say something. In 1985, he and his friend Dale Crover formed the punk band Fecal Matter. The band Melvins featured Crover on drums. Their initial recordings were made in a bedroom using a cassette recorder. It is tumultuous and chaotic, yet brimming with agony and vitality. As if every strumming of the guitar strings were a scream of suppressed isolation, they weren't meant to be released but rather eliminated. Olympia, Washington, the counterculture epicenter of the state at the time, was the site of the Illiteracy Will Prevail demonstration, which generated considerable buzz. It was there that Kurt crossed paths with Chris Novoselic, a towering, lanky man who shared his love of punk music and a clumsy bass player. They quickly became friends and began making music together. Nirvana came into being when they convened to play music. The first thing they knew was that they were free. After that, they didn't care about names or directions. The band's performance venues ranged from friends' garages to vacant buildings and tiny bars. Even if it was only 3 people, having power and someone to listen to them would be paradise. Sub Pop, an independent label, released their debut single, Love Buzz, in 1988. The Seattle music scene was being promoted nationally at the time by Sub Pop. Bleach, their debut album, was released in 1989. The production cost was a mere 66 bucks, 17. Meanwhile, it featured somber lyrics, thumping drums, and a bass line that resembled a claw dragging against a wall. Bleach was ineffective. Rarely did it crack the top 40 on college radio, and even then only in underground circles. However, Kurt considered it his initial declaration. With a voice that sliced through the pretense and glitz, he communicated in his native tongue. This is when Kurt began penning the now iconic Come As You Are, Lithium, and Polly. Kurt's early memories, his animosity toward the educational system, his contempt for the media, and his profound emotional scars from previous relationships all found their way into these songs. Out of shock, he didn't write. Because he couldn't suppress the thought, he had to put it down on paper. There was a broken personal life hiding behind the love of music. Friends of Kurt's made fun of his Olympia, Washington apartment, saying it looked like a junkie's house, but without the drugs. Because he was a chronic rent-a-rearser, he spent a lot of time sleeping in his car, subsisting on canned goods and smoking pot daily. Dull tasks were his downfall. He briefly considered working as a school cleaner but ultimately decided against it. As far as Kurt was concerned, music was the sole constant in his life. In the midst of all this turmoil, defiance and difficulty, Nirvana emerged. The band never once compromised, sugarcoated, or settled. Instead, they sang solely to and for those going through similar pain. While on tour in California, Kurt noticed a message affixed to the wall of his accommodation. Kathleen Hanna, who plays in the band Bikini Kill, wrote it. His girlfriend Toby Vale wore a deodorant brand named Kurt that read, "Smells like Teen Spirit." However, Kurt attached greater significance to the words. The aroma of their youthful, naive, and fiercely rebellious spirit permeated the air. Now that he had jotted it down, a new section was about to begin. Releasing Nevermind on September 24, 1991, a record by a relatively unknown grunge band, had no idea it would have such a profound effect on the global music industry. Since DGC Records considered it an excellent independent product rather than a probable hit, they limited the initial run to 50,000 copies. The release of Smells Like Teen Spirit on MTV, however, caused a dramatic shift. Even though the track was a jumble and had no words on it, it screamed. It was also a declaration of a bygone era from the early 90s. Kurt was shown in the video standing in a smoke-filled gym. Things were becoming increasingly out of hand as students smashed furniture and dancers donned witch costumes. Its popularity stemmed from the fact that it was unlike any other television program airing at the time. Smells Like Teen Spirit was more than just music. A whole generation felt that way. When Nevermind surpassed Michael Jackson's Dangerous on the Billboard charts, Nirvana went from being an independent band to a global cultural phenomenon in the span of a few months. The album surpassed all expectations, selling over 30 million copies globally by its conclusion, a feat that no alternative band had achieved before. Previously, Come As You Are, Lithium, and Polly were merely tracks. They became hushed ballads for a generation that was bewildered and crushed by modern city life, its superficiality, politics, and families. Unfamiliar with fame, Kurt Cobain suddenly found himself the center of attention.
He never wanted to be a role model because he didn't think he was good enough or strong enough to represent anyone, despite the fact that he was on Rolling Stone's cover, a Saturday Night Live guest of honor, and constantly referred to as the voice of Generation X. In Utero, Nirvana's third studio album was released in 1993. Similar to Nevermind, In Utero was a slap in the face to the music industry. One producer who is notoriously unpopular is Steve Albini. Kurt intentionally hired Albini to create an album that sounded like it had been recorded in a makeshift bedroom, raw, unpolished, and brutally honest. No longer could people share music. Songs like All Apologies, Heart-Shaped Box, and Rape Me had a darker, more eerie tone. Kurt found that screaming helped him stay composed. His works dealt with sexuality, media portrayals of sexual assault, childhood anxieties, and unhealed wounds. Despite its avant-garde nature and lack of commercial success, In Utero achieved platinum status in the United States and sold more than 5 million copies, and so in many other locations as well. Even though there was a clear message, commercial success was still there. The pursuit of happiness for others had lost its appeal for Nirvana. In order to be genuine, they were prepared to do whatever. During their peak, Nirvana also performed on the world-renowned MTV Unplugged show in New York City, a performance in which they eschewed feedback, distortion, and amplifiers. The Smells Like Teen Spirit concert was cancelled. No popular songs were included in the setlist. Rather, Kurt chose melancholy ballads such as Where Did You Sleep Last Night, a traditional folk song that he reworked with his trembling, anguished voice to commemorate his departure. Everyone has since agreed that this performance was MTV Unplugged's crowning achievement. Additionally, it was Kurt Cobain's final studio album before his career took a nosedive. From 1991 to 1994, a mere 3 years, Nirvana revolutionized the sound of American popular music. It wasn't only grunge from Seattle that they disseminated. They cleared the way for alternative rock, punk's comeback, and the emergence of tiny indie bands by burying the shiny sounds of the 80s. In order to achieve fame, Nirvana did not alter their sound. People could relate to their honesty and the struggles they were going through, which contributed to their popularity. The movement's nerve center was Kurt Cobain, a frail man who never felt he deserved anything. As the last authentic voice of Generation X, he became an unintentional icon. Beyond the music, Kurt Cobain's life changed when he met Courtney Love. He had previously claimed he didn't believe in true love. In 1990, they first crossed paths at an Oregon concert. Courtney, frontwoman of the wild rock band Hole, didn't even go to see Nirvana play. However, she amused herself by tossing Kurt to the ground and then melted into the crowd as soon as she caught sight of him. Kurt recalled that they were silent. After some time apart, they reunited and couldn't tear themselves apart. They were both artists who grew up with troubled backgrounds and loved disorder and rebellion. They shared many interests and experiences, including music, drugs, isolation, hatred of the media, and the constant sense that no one understood them. On February 24, 1992, they exchanged wedding vows atop a cliff in Waikiki, Hawaii. The actor Frances Farmer, who was tarnished by the media and the public, once belonged to Courtney. She wore his dress. Pantsless, Kurt lay in bed. He appeared weary and happy in the photo taken that day, as if he had finally found someone who understood him, as he leaned over her shoulder. However, problems also arose because of the similarity. They were utterly reliant on one another, and drawn to one another like magnets to the brink of disaster due to the intensity of their love for one another. Both of their houses were covered in diapers and needles, and they were both addicted to heroin. From the press, it was concealed. Courtney was accused of drug use during her pregnancy in a shocking story published by Vanity Fair when she became pregnant. It appeared as though Frances Bean Cobain, their unborn daughter, was already a victim because of this. Their right to custody was temporarily revoked by the Los Angeles government shortly after Frances was born in August 1992. Anguish washed over Kurt. In a letter addressed to the record label, he referred to the incident as a public crucifixion. Despite ultimately reuniting with Frances, the emotional scars did not fully fade. Kurt began to doubt everything: the news, society, the law, and even himself. Being a dad while dealing with your own issues isn't easy. His daughter was Kurt's first priority. On one occasion, he surprised her with surprisingly kind letters. At a 1993 performance, Courtney was the target of harsh criticism from the media. To the assembled onlookers, he remarked, "My wife thinks everyone hates her. However, love was insufficient. I beg you, please don't raise my daughter to be so angry." It was the medicine every time. His needles were concealed, Courtney. Even when his friends attempted to aid him, Kurt managed to evade them every time. His socks, shirt hem, and even Frances's toy lunchbox were once stuffed with heroin. Even on the worst of nights, Kurt managed to crack a smile. Under his breath, he whispered to his best friend Buzz Osborne, "I have a daughter now, and she's the only thing that's keeping me here." Still, he appeared to be cognizant of the fact that he was receding in proximity. Love couldn't rescue him. He couldn't be saved just by being a dad. No matter how much Courtney attempted, she was unable to bring him to the ground. In the flood, she was merely one of many. In the midst of the Nevermind crowd's cries, Kurt Cobain retreated to a dark room where the spotlights couldn't illuminate him, revealing his story of addiction, despair, and breakdown. He had finally accomplished all he had set out to do. However, it had the opposite effect of bringing peace and actually made matters worse. It was as if his own music had failed him. What was once a haven for him turned into a prison where he was confined to roles, expectations, and definitions he despised. Unidentified, persistent abdominal pain had plagued Kurt for quite some time. He complained that whenever he sang, it was as if someone were stabbing him in the belly. After a fruitless search involving hundreds of medications and dozens of doctors, he finally resorted to drug use. While it served merely as a pain reliever at first, it eventually became the sole support system for his delicate mental health. Even his closest friends and family were in the dark about it. To his admirers, he remained a hero. He was aware that he was about to emotionally collapse. The rest of Nirvana, particularly Dave Grohl and Chris Novoselic, saw it. They hoped he would just shut up and listen. However, Kurt retreated even further. He was notorious for missing rehearsals, performing while under the influence of drugs, and occasionally losing the lyrics to songs mid-performance. Going on every tour became risky. Whether he could complete it was a mystery to everyone. His relationship with Dave had diminished from its former intensity. It irritated Dave. Chris hit rock bottom. When a spirit was departing, no one knew how to draw near. It appeared as though Kurt had no energy left when In Utero was released. He was forthright about his distaste for the spotlight, celebrity, and Nirvana. Their early 1994 European tour was when things started to go downhill. "I hate this band. I hate having to pretend to be a happy person when I'm dying inside." On March 4th, Courtney Love discovered Kurt asleep in a Rome hotel. He had a bottle of champagne and a pack of Rohypnol pills by his side. When he was taken to the hospital, he was in a coma. The family was informed by doctors that he would not have survived had they discovered him a short while later. Although a note was discovered, its authenticity as a suicide note or a jotted thought remains uncertain. However, for those closest to him, it was the initial indication that Kurt might no longer desire to live. A number of international news organizations initially reported the death of Kurt Cobain, but they later recanted their report. A gloomy omen remained cast over the people by the false warning. As a result, Nirvana canceled the remainder of their tour. A plane whisked her back to America and arranged for the necessary intervention. A large gathering was held, including friends, relatives, managers, musicians, and others. Kurt was surrounded by a plethora of individuals who pleaded, screamed, and pleaded with him to enter rehabilitation. Kurt had previously declined. He was weary of resisting, not because he was prepared, so he said yes. Kurt Cobain checked into the Los Angeles Exodus Recovery Center on March 30, 1994, marking the beginning of his final days and the contentious funeral. Unlike before, he didn't argue. Fights and explosions did not occur. After a silent nod, he strode away with a guitar, a few magazines, and a peculiarly vacant expression on his face. Members of his immediate circle, including Courtney, Dave, Chris, friends, and relatives, speculated that he might be serious about giving it another go this time. The truth, though, was that Kurt was merely pretending to be fine. For those who meant the most to him, his final performance. On April 1st, just 2 days after that, he escaped. He leaped over a nearly 2-meter-tall fence, rode a cab to the airport, and then returned to Seattle. His whereabouts were a mystery to everyone. No one knew what he was thinking. Only one call could be made using a public phone booth. Kurt contacted Courtney while she was still at her own rehabilitation facility. "I love you no matter what." Their conversation ended there. Finally, the moment when Kurt Cobain's voice was heard by anyone. His friends were unable to contact him thereafter. With enough fear, Courtney retained the services of a private investigator. A friend contacted the Seattle police to report someone missing, but nobody was worried. He was believed by everyone to be avoiding the press, desiring solitude, furious, or simply too exhausted to confront the world. Nobody anticipated that he would be in his own house so near. On April 8, 1994, a professional electrician was sent to Kurt's residence to install a security system.